This is Anarchast.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. The reason I greeted you that way is because we have our first Muslim anarchist on. And what I try to do here at Anarchast is to try to have as many diverse people on as possible. We've had a gay anarchist on recently. Now we're going to have a Muslim anarchist on. We've had Christian anarchists on. There's all kinds of different anarchists, or different styles of anarchists, or people who have different things they also believe besides anarchism. And it's great to have him on. His name's Davi Barker, and he writes for dailyanarchist.com, which we've had Seth King on a few times before. That's his site. And he also writes for silvercircle.com. We've had Megan Duffrey on as well in the past. So it's a tight-knit community. We all seem to know each other because there's probably only about 300 of us on Earth. And Davi's coming in from just outside of Oakland. How are you, Davi?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Before we get into your Muslim stuff and how it relates to anarchy, the very first question I always have to ask everyone is, how did you become an anarchist?
Well, I'm kind of one of those people that weasels around the word anarchy because a lot of people are upset by it. But if I'm talking to somebody who understands the definition, I don't object. For me, it's really just about being consistently against violence. And so I don't necessarily have all the answers as to what I think society will look like or should look like, but I know what it shouldn't look like. And that's essentially how I came to it.
And so were you a Muslim first or anarchist first?
Well, I was a libertarian before I converted to Islam, but I was sort of more of a sort of Ron Paul, maybe party libertarian. And then when I converted to Islam, suddenly it became very important to me to be consistent because it's when you convert to a religion, you'll have a lot of people telling you what it means to be part of that religion. And so you have to kind of come up with a methodology to determine which camp or which arguments or which positions within the religion are going to be consistent. And so in doing that, I also began examining my political positions and making them consistent. So I really sort of came along to both at the same time.
And how long ago was that?
That was maybe 6 years ago.
Okay. And what made you convert to Islam?
Well, I'd been reading a biography of the Prophet Muhammad. And before that, I was doing sort of an interfaith project, sort of like trying to reconcile different religions or show where they're compatible or where they overlap. I was trying to argue that they were all part of a sort of single tradition. And when I came across Islam and I started trying to incorporate Islam into that project, I found that it had already done a lot of the work for me. And so I became convinced of the Shahada, or the testimony of faith in Islam, is to believe in one God and to believe that Muhammad is his prophet. And so as soon as I came to believe those things, reading his biography, I converted. And I wasn't really sure all of the implications of that at the time, but I just knew that if I was going to be sincere with myself and I believed both of those things, that I wanted to adopt the language.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how a lot of these religions, they all kind of appear to fight against each other when they are fairly similar. Is that correct?
Sure. If you don't mind my asking, what's your religious background?
I was raised in a family that my mother was Protestant and my dad didn't really care. And we went to church maybe 2 or 3 times, and I didn't really like it. The big thing I didn't like was the institution of the religion, the people, the church. I actually went on in my life and I discovered many things about Jesus, for example, that I really liked. I think Jesus was basically an anarchist. Sure. Was Mohammad an anarchist in your opinion?
In my opinion, it was. I don't believe there was anything resembling a state at the time.
And he believed in non-aggression just the same as Jesus?
Sure. Well, Muslims also accept Jesus, so I would even say that Muhammad and Jesus are practicing the same religion. It's just a matter of sort of what's been recorded in history that makes us disagree.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of people watching right now because of what they hear in mostly the media about Islam that are saying that's crazy. It's a very murderous and dangerous thing. How would you respond to that?
Well, if you look at the example of Muhammad's life, he was in battles. There were battles that took place in his lifetime and at his leadership. But in every instance, I've shown in the book that they were acts of self-defense, and in every instance, he did his utmost to prevent acts of aggression and rejected them and condemned them. So, I mean, it is a doctrine of self-defense. It's not a doctrine of aggressive war.
And, you know, just like all religions, they all get twisted over time by a lot of different people. There's, you know, there's a lot of Christians that aren't really believing in what Jesus was saying. They're believing in what the church now says about what Jesus was saying, which probably is not correct for the most part, depending on which church you listen to. Would you say the same about Islam?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we're so far out historically, like as far as like time is concerned, we're very far out from its origins, and so it's easy for people to come up with interpretations. And, you know, people are poorly educated, or people are, I mean, there are sincere disagreements, and I don't have a problem with people having sincere disagreements. But the nature of a sort of intellectual agreement or disagreement is that it has to be sort of worked out nonviolently. So,
yeah, if it's not worked out nonviolently, then it's not intellectual.
Right, exactly.
And yeah, unfortunately, you must be quite interested in what's going on in the U.S. with all, you know, attacking so many countries where most people are Muslim.
Sure. I mean, there's also a lot of domestic stuff. Like, we've seen a lot of instances where the FBI comes into our community as informants and tries to drum up terrorists or fake terrorists. And, you know, we see a lot of the government kind of goes after Muslim charities and tries to construe them as providing material support for terrorism when it's really not true. So yeah, I mean, like, politically speaking, Islam is in the forefront as far as American domestic and foreign policy. But I don't think that I reject. If I was not Muslim, I think I would find it just as abhorrent to be drone striking civilians in foreign countries and things like that. I think everybody should be outraged by it.
Oh, I totally agree. So do you know any other Muslims that would consider themselves anarchists?
Yeah, it's not as rare as you'd think. There's sort of I've probably met Muslims of every kind of vein of anarchism. Mostly, I'd say they were like left anarchists. There's also some sort of indigenous anarchist traditions, like Hakim Bey has what he calls ontological anarchism, or Yaqub Islam has what he calls post-colonial anarcho-pacifism. So there's a lot of kind of like discussion about like anti-authoritarianism in Islam. But I'd say most of the people that I associate personally are somewhere in the vein of sort of political libertarian to voluntarist.
Oh, that's great. So there's a whole other group of people I wasn't even aware of. There's, of course, a lot of Christian anarchists.
Sure.
Just off the top of my head, Lou Rockwell, Jeffrey Tucker, some of the great
Sure.
anarchist minds of our time. So it's great to hear, and I'm sure most of our audience hasn't heard this before, so this is fantastic.
So, for example, I'm the assistant director of Muslims for Liberty at muslimsforliberty.org. And there are some of us in there that are sort of full-blown voluntarist anarchists, and there are others that are more like your sort of constitutionalist libertarians. But we're trying to like get the discussion going, and it's great to have other people to bounce ideas off of and work with. So I'm not alone in this pursuit.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm really happy to hear that. And you call yourself the Muslim Agorist. Why don't you explain to people what Agorism is and why you denote yourself as such?
Sure. Well, I kind of think of agorism as voluntarism in action. It's really more of a strategy than it is a political position. It's the idea that the way to reduce the state or ignore or to remove the state is to ignore the state, and to create a robust counter-economy and create alternatives to public services, so that the black market, or what is the free market, can eventually sort of begin to replace public services and begin to sort of become a counter society. So I'm a full-time agorist. I left my job maybe 6 months ago, and now I work from home as a blogger, as a graphic designer, as a product developer, things like that. And Sometimes, because of the clients I work with, I'm forced to declare some of the income because they're going to file some sort of thing. But for the most part, it's all off grid, right? So I take it upon myself to donate a lot of my income to social projects that I support, like free aid and things like that, because I recognize that it's not coming out of any taxes that I'm paying because I'm not paying those taxes.
That's great.
But it's about creating a counter economy and demonstrating that this philosophy and that this ideology can work in the real world.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fantastic, and I really respect people who try to just ignore the state, and that's actually my approach as well. There's no way we're going to beat it with violence. That's their game. That's
Sure.
what they do.
That's their home field.
Yes. We're not going to win on their home field, so we have to find other ways, and that's a great way to do it, is to go around it. And I recently posted on Facebook that I have so many anarchists and freedom-minded people on my Facebook. I actually refuse to have status on my Facebook, so I see posts all day long saying how much they hate the government, and I posted, well, why don't you stop paying taxes then? You're just supporting them by paying their extortion fees. And so many people were so hesitant and scared. They said, oh, I'll be kidnapped.
Yeah.
Well, we have to take a stand at some point and just say enough is enough.
Yeah, this will be the first time that I have to figure out what I'm going to file and what I'm not going to file, because this is the first time tax season has come along and I don't have a W-2. So I haven't totally decided what level of, disobedience I'm going to engage in, but I'm definitely not declaring a lot of my income.
That's great. The less they have, the better. And you must have some thoughts on Bitcoin as an alternative currency, the non-government currency.
Sure. I'm pretty bullish on Bitcoin. I accept it on my websites. I've written some articles about it. I was at Liberty Forum this weekend, and I posted in the morning. I was a vendor, and in the morning I posted all of my prices in dollars and in Bitcoin. But by the end of the day, Bitcoin had gone up $1, and so all my prices were low. And so you saw people who were eager, because I was going to honor that price. And so you had people that were following Bitcoin who realized, like, he's underpricing all of his stuff. And I sold a lot of stuff in Bitcoin because of that.
Yeah, it's not perfect, especially at this moment in time, as it's still finding its way in people's lives. So it is a lot more volatile than fiat currencies. But in the end, it's going to be less volatile because those fiat currencies are going to zero, and Bitcoin probably never will. Yeah,
Right.
it probably never will.
It's also going the other way. Like, volatility in the right direction is okay sometimes.
Yeah, you can be on the right side of volatility, and that's good. So, do you have any other thoughts on Islam and anarchy and voluntarism and peacefulness?
I mean, yeah, I have lots of thoughts. I just published my book, Voluntary Islam and Other Essays. You can find both the paperback and the ebook on Amazon, or you could find it at my website, which is muslimagorist.com. And I'm making kind of two arguments. I have a two-pronged approach to this. One is, I think it's been demonstrated by history that leaders always become tyrants. And if leaders always become tyrants, then I think that it's time to stop having leaders, right? So that's sort of that's the future prong of my approach. But the other prong of my approach is that if you look at Islamic history, and you look at the example of the Prophet Muhammad, they don't have a state by modern definitions because they don't have a monopoly on law. They don't have a monopoly on force. They don't have, there were other units of society, like the Jews and the pagans and the Christians in their communities had their own judicial systems, had their own legal systems, and they existed right on top of each other. So you didn't have a regional monopoly on force, and that's how we define the state today. You had people opting into the judiciaries that they were part of. And so I think two things could happen. One, if you could get back to that, you would see a very kind of robust competition in judicial services, in legal services that people consented to. But also, if people would just admit that the states they have now don't really have any legitimacy religiously or secularly or otherwise, then they'll begin to contemplate alternatives.
That's very interesting. And I just saw Jeffrey Tucker post the other day on Facebook something about Sharia law would be better than the status law that we have today. And I don't know anything about Sharia law. What's Sharia law?
Well, there's two faces of Sharia law, right? I mean, the word literally in Arabic means a broad road to water, right? And it was the name of the road that went to the well. But it's come to mean just law. So it's kind of redundant to say Sharia law, because even if you weren't talking about Islamic law in Arabic, you would use the word Sharia anyway. So it means a lot of different things to different people. And so there's dispute, right? So there are people that believe some crazy things and they call it Islamic law. But I'm arguing that I kind of want the crazy people to have their crazy laws. I just don't want them to be able to impose them on anybody who doesn't consent. It's sort of like I've said before that the best cure for communism is to try it. So I want them to give it their earnest and try to build the society that they want, but I want them to do it on a voluntary basis because that's how they need to learn. And I want them to not be able to impose those laws on the people who disagree. And I want the people who disagree to have the freedom to try to build their societies in earnest and demonstrate whether or not they have better ideas. So traditionally, Islamic law was not connected to the state at all. In the periods of Islamic history where there was a state, or they called it a caliphate or an imamate, the religious scholars who were deciding religious law, they were private. They were not employees of the government. And essentially, you would see the government coming to them and trying to buy them off and trying to manipulate what they said law was. But fundamentally, what is traditional Islamic law throughout history was separate from the state. And so it was sort of considered an act of sort of discovery or interpretation, not an act of legislation. I'm going to have to look at this thing from Jeffrey Tucker. If you could send me that link, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, he just mentioned it the other day. I'll try to find it. I didn't even read it, but I found the title very interesting because I'd never heard that before. So, yeah, that's all very interesting. And of course, I believe, and that's what anarchy to me is all about, is about voluntary transactions and consenting. And I don't call those people like Barack Obama leaders, I call them misleaders. And unfortunately, for thousands of years, we've been misled by this idea of collectivism. And we need to take our own personal responsibility. And I think that's basically what you're saying. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it's been great having you on. We're going to have links to your books and your articles down below in the notes. And I guess that's it. So that's Davi Barker. Thank you very much for coming in with us. It's been very interesting.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was fun.
Okay, it's my pleasure. And that's another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.